I made a Carver's mallet about 5 years ago, and it really doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it has. And in making that mallet, I glued two pieces of wood together, end to end. And I made a joint between the two pieces of wood by cutting slots in the end of each of the pieces on the table saw. Then gluing the two pieces together with that joint, which was sort of a box joint or a finger joint, I guess. Then the idea was that I would turn that new blank into a mallet on the lathe. And I like the form that I came up with. It's got a nice feel, sort of a nice balance to it. But the joint that I made wasn't really tight, and because the cuts were linear, it was different as it went around the mallet. And I had always wanted to make a radial joint for the mallet so that the fingers of the joint would be even all the way around. So one of the reasons for building the CNC machine originally was to be able to cut this sort of radial joint. So I made a clamp that would hold the two pieces of wood for the mallet on the CNC table so that I could cut that joint into each of the ends of the mallet pieces. So this is the piece for the handle, and it seemed to hold it pretty well. And it seemed to go pretty well cutting it. I came up with a bunch of different options for different numbers of fingers in the joint. This is the 7-finger option, which felt about right. Then this is the piece for the head, so it'll be the inverse of the joint. And I set the 0, at the center of the piece, and I made sure the height was exactly the same on both of them, as the depth of the joint needs to be the same on both sides so that both sides bottom out onto each other and you don't get a gap at the end of the joint. Then it's just a matter of gluing the two sides together, which is just painting some glue into all of the little spaces of the joint. Now I wanted to cut off some of the extra material around the handle, as it's a lot quicker to remove the material with a bandsaw than with the lathe. So I did a quick sketch of the shape of the original mallet on my new blank, and I cut the material away from the handle on two sides. Then I taped those pieces back onto the blank, and I can rotate the blank 90 degrees in the bandsaw and cut the sides from the other two sides off the blank, using the pieces that are taped back on as support. And it's starting to look a little bit like a mallet. I can put it on the lathe. I started by mounting it with the head on the drive side of the lathe and turned the handle mostly. And as this was the first one, it took a little while getting the shape right, or to a point that I like the shape. Now, as part of the joint, I had cut away a circle on the CNC, so I'd have a little bit of a reference to cut to. And I left a little bit of a circle on the handle end, and I can put a smaller jaw on the chuck and turn the mallet around in the lathe and now work on the other end. And at this point I can get to the final shape. I made a cutout to see if that would help in sort of looking through the hole at the shape I was making. And I'm not sure that was really all that helpful. Then once I was really close, I could sand, and I just went through all the grits. I think I went up to 1,000, so I got it nice and smooth. So at this point, I've made one, and I wanted to make a whole batch of these. So it became a different project at this point, where it was still making the mallet, but it was figuring out how to make the mallet faster. So I cut a bunch of the wood blanks all at once. And once the stops are set up on the saws, that goes really quick. This saw goes through this hardwood like there's nothing there. It's really nice. These are the heads being cut. I think the handles I made 7 inches and the heads I made 5 inches or something close to that. Then I can start cutting. Now I changed a couple of things. My first mallet, the bottom of the joint wasn't perfectly even, so I decided what I should do is first flatten the top as a first pass to cutting the joint, so that the joint will be flat to the CNC machine. Then the second thing I did is I got rid of the circle that I cut into the joint, and that would mean less time removing material with the CNC machine. And it's a little faster to remove that material on the lathe. And then the third thing I did is I did a finishing pass to help the joint be a little bit more accurate. And then another thing I did to speed things up, which was really nice, is I combined the G code of those 3 passes so that I could just let it run and it would just do its thing and do all 3 of those operations without me having to go back to load a new file each time. So I could just let it run and go do something else in the shop. And I think the heads were 6 minutes and the handles were 8 minutes or something. So it was something like that. Then I can start gluing them together, and they went together a little better now as they bottomed out nicely. So again, it's just painting the glue onto all of the surfaces. I was putting these on the floor and tapping them with a little sledgehammer to get them to go together completely. And then once they were together, I would clamp the 2 pieces together. Now I used my little template as the template for the mallet on the blank, and that made this much quicker and much more accurate because they were all similar. Then I could cut off the handle section. Now another little thing I did is instead of using tape, which I would cut, on the next pass I would use hot glue, which was a lot quicker, and it stayed together as I was cutting the second side. So that this worked a lot better than the tape. And if I got the glue in just the right place, they'd come apart once it was cut. But sometimes I had to kind of help them apart. So it's starting to look a little bit like a mallet. And I found the centers on all of them, all at the same time. Now another thing I did to remove material was to cut the corners off on the bandsaw. Now my smaller green bandsaw didn't seem like it would easily tilt for some reason. I forget exactly why. But the big bandsaw tilts really easily, but it's a pain putting the fence on when it's at a 45. But I managed. And once that was set up, it went really quickly, cutting the corners off. And this really does speed up the time on the lathe. And the other thing I did is I cut a little circular piece on the handle end of the blank on the CNC machine so that it was all ready to go on the lathe, and I wouldn't have to turn each piece around midway through the time on the lathe. So I could just put it on and finish it. So it was taking about an hour to make each of these on the lathe, even with all of the little speed up things. And then it would take another hour of sanding to get it finished. Now my red drill that I've been using as a sander kind of broke. It's still working, but it doesn't sound right. Like it needs something replaced in the motor. So I got a new sander that actually works a little better, I think. Now I can remove the little bit at the head end of the mallet, and I can do that on the disc sander. And carefully get it as close as I can to finished. And I made a steady that will hold a small diameter piece. So I can use that to mount the mallet at one end, at the handle end, and work on the head end of the mallet with the sanders. And I can get the head of the mallet perfect. And I work through all the different sandpapers. This went pretty fast, as it's not a big surface area. Now, the first few I did like this, and I got a little ring where the wheels of the steady are. So I would sand that off. But then I figured out I could put tape on the mallet where the wheels are, and this helped keep that ring from happening. And this was a little quicker because I could just pull the tape off and it would be done. Now I can cut the piece at the handle off that's been holding the mallet on the lathe. And I can shape that end of the mallet on the disc sander. And I started by hand sanding, or sanding with a little hand sander on the end. And this was kind of working, but it was taking a while and it wasn't as nice as I'd really like it to be. I started to think about it, and it would really be nice to hold the mallet on the lathe with the handle end sticking out. So I made some wooden jaws for the chuck that would hold the mallet without scuffing up the mallet. I have some flat jaw plates that I can attach the wood to. So you can see the shape of the wood is the way it is so that I can get at one of the bolts on the jaws. And I found a wide rubber band that I cut up, and I hot glued little pieces of rubber to the inside of the jaws. So I can put the mallet in with the handle side out and adjust the steady to hold the handle. The one thing that was a little bit of a pain with this is I had to open up the steady to get the mallet in and out each time because the head is bigger than the handle. I thought I could get away without the tape, but I really couldn't. So the later mallets I put tape on, which meant I could just pull it off and pull the tape off, and it was done. They're finished. I wondered about finish and whether I should just leave them without any finish, but I ended up putting walnut oil on them. It isn't shiny. It looks about like it doesn't have finish. It just brings the grain out a little bit. I did the handles first and let those dry. Then I found a scrap piece of wood and put a bunch of screws into it. And I could hang the mallets from the handles and put finish on the head part of the mallet. Thanks for watching.